Welcome. My name is Tabbye Chavous, and I am the director of the university's National Center for Institutional Diversity. We're thrilled to be able to co-host this event together with the Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We're so glad to see so many of you here today for the inaugural Distinguished Diversity Scholar Career Award lecture. This award recognizes Dr. James Jackson for his critical scholarly contributions to understanding the life and health experiences of Black Americans, as well as his unwavering commitment to mentoring and promoting the careers of generations of researchers. For those of you who were at the symposium events earlier today, I'm sure you will agree that it was really impressive to see the far-reaching impact that James's work has had on scholarship relevant to enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in our broader society. Before we get started with our official program, I want to acknowledge units and individuals that have played key roles in organizing this day. First, I recognize leaders from the Program for Research on Black Americans, including Cleopatra Caldwell, Robert Taylor, and Woody Neighbors. I also recognize the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, the Institute for Social Research, the School of Public Health, the Department of Psychology, and the Office of the Provost. Special thanks to Ellen Meter from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as Laura Harrington, and Ching-Yun Sylvester and Marie Ting from the National Center for Institutional Diversity for their leadership and coordination for today's events. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the support for the establishment of this award from the offices of the President and Provost. That the University of Michigan recognizes the importance of diversity scholarship on the overall advancement of our institution is what brings us all here today in celebration of James Jackson's life work. So thank you, President Schlissel and Provost Philbert, for your support of this award and of today's events. I now invite to the podium President Mark S. Schlissel. President Schlissel has been an unwavering supporter and leader of diversity initiatives and innovations since his arrival at Michigan in 2014. And he has been outspoken in his commitment to creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive campus in order to affect the public and society. President Schlissel.
Well, thanks, Tabbye, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really thrilled to see such a large and excited audience for today's talk. This is the kind of event that we look forward to at the university through the year. I want to thank everyone from our National Center for Institutional Diversity and our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for making this wonderful celebration possible. I also want to express my appreciation to NCID for their week-long campaign earlier this month to combat unscientific racism. As we're in a room full of scholars, we can all appreciate the need to call out purposeful misuse of the mantle of academic legitimacy through the promulgation of flawed research, intentionally misleading interpretations, and outright lies. Thankfully, today's honoree has spent his career producing science that is of unquestionable integrity and value to our society. With the inaugural Distinguished Diversity Scholar Career Award, we're celebrating a colleague who has made the university and the world a better place. James Jackson exemplifies our highest ideals of what we strive to do as a great research university. We seek to strengthen the discovery and transmission of knowledge itself by understanding that the convergence of students, faculty, and staff from all backgrounds leads to better research, teaching, and learning. We seek to create a campus that serves and is welcoming to all. We seek to build a university that lives up to the highest ideals of its public heritage. The establishment of this award is an important component of our strategic plan to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the plan's overarching strategies is to support innovative and inclusive scholarship and teaching. Throughout the history of our university, we've been proud to provide a home for scholars who've advanced our understanding of one another and of the enormous educational and scholarly benefits of diversity. They conducted research that provided incontrovertible evidence to the Supreme Court and inspired generations of students to pursue social justice on our own campus and beyond. Today, we stand on their shoulders, and we walk the trails they blazed for us on the journey to a better university. The Distinguished Diversity Scholar Career Award is one way we are honoring that legacy. It's a permanent tribute to those who have made significant contributions to diversity, equity, and inclusion while addressing disparities in contemporary society. Its primary goals are to help us build a more robust body of knowledge and teaching in these areas, to elevate this research agenda nationally, and to provide important recognition to scholars whose work may have been undervalued in the past. I was proud to present Dr. Jackson with the award earlier this month at our Faculty Awards dinner. This type of recognition is crucial. Our nation and world continue to experience horrific and tragic reminders of the pervasiveness of hate and discrimination. Hate groups and white supremacists have caused death and injury, and they use our differences as human beings in an effort to justify the empowerment of one group over another. As students and educators at a public university and as members of a pluralistic and free society who aspire to lead the larger world, we have a specific obligation to uphold our most cherished values. Our shared values of mutual respect, unity, equality, and hope. We know that there's so much more work for us to do, because while talent is equally distributed in our society, opportunity most certainly is not. Next week, the University of Michigan will convene our annual Diversity Summit to come together as a community a year after the launch of our strategic plan. The summit gives us the opportunity to reflect on our progress and discuss the challenges we continue to face at the U of M. Included in our summit is the release of data from new surveys of students, faculty, and staff on the campus climate, which also are part of our plan. Like the research of Dr. Jackson and many others, the surveys provide important information that we will use for good. They'll help us assess where we are now and better craft our programs going forward. We know that the way individual students, faculty, and staff experience the university too often depends on individual or group identities, and some members of our community do not feel welcome. This is a challenge that we are addressing with eyes wide open and with full vigor as we embark on our third century at the University of Michigan. We remain committed to the belief that the University of Michigan cannot be excellent without being diverse in the broadest sense of the word. And our dedication to academic excellence for the public good will remain inseparable from our commitment to ensuring that we're a diverse and inclusive university. It's now my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's next speaker. Rob Sellers is the Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion and the first Chief Diversity Officer in the history of the University of Michigan. His research has focused on the role of race in the psychological lives of African Americans, and he's published extensively in the areas of racial identity, racial discrimination, and racial socialization, and their impact on psychological well-being. Rob is also a U of M alumnus, earning his PhD in personality psychology here in 1990. Please help me welcome Dr. Rob Sellers.
Thank you very much, President Schlissel, for those wonderful remarks. And I too agree, it is so wonderful and beautiful to look out here and see so many wonderful people here for this most wonderful and austere occasion. I'm pleased to be here today and to tell you just a little bit about the man we are honoring this afternoon. James S. Jackson earned his Bachelor of Science degree from Michigan State University. We won't hold that against him. A Master's of Arts degree from the University of Toledo, as well as a PhD from Wayne State. He started his long and distinguished career here at the university back in 1971 as a faculty member in the Department of Psychology. He later went on and established the Program for Research on Black America in 1976. At U of M, he has held numerous, and I do mean numerous, administrative positions over the years. And just to name a couple, he was the Associate Dean of Rackham. I remember that because at the time I was a graduate student, and this is where I had to meet him when he was my advisor to make sure I got my dissertation done. He was also the director for 10 years of the Institute for Social Research. James is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a member of the National Academy of Medicine. He is a founding member of the MacArthur Foundation Aging Society Research Network. He is also a member of the National Science Board and a past president of the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, as well as the Consortium of Social Science Association. And that's just a few. In addition, he's been designated to serve on the National Institutes of Health National Advisory Council on Minority Health and Health Disparities. Among his many honors, he has received the American Psychiatric Association Solomon Carter Fuller Award, the New York Academy of Medicine Medal for Distinguished Contributions in Biomedical Sciences, the American Psychological Association Award for Distinguished Service to Psychological Sciences, and at the University of Michigan, the Harold R. Johnson Diversity Service Award, as well as the Distinguished Faculty Achievement Award. James is internationally recognized for his innovative research on the influence of race on the health of African Americans, including the development of the National Survey of Black Americans, which is considered the most extensive social, mental, and physical health survey of the U.S. Black population. Through the development of this survey, as well as the later National Survey of American Life, James and his colleagues made a bold statement that the life experiences of African Americans are worthy of study in and of themselves. Previously, the overwhelming majority of research on African Americans took a comparative approach in which African Americans' experiences were studied only in comparison with whites, and usually in those instances, always from a deficit model. James's approach to studying within-group variation in African Americans determined or demanded that African Americans' humanities be considered in the scientific community. It also presaged a number of other within-group examinations of traditionally underrepresented groups in society that are much more prevalent today. James Jackson is probably the most important researcher with respect to the life experiences of African Americans in the past 100 years. His work transcends the traditional fields of psychology, sociology, political science, and public health. It provides a rich and vibrant picture of the strengths, challenges, and functions that characterizes the breadth of experiences of the African American community. In doing so, James's work has been foundational to our understanding of the social determinants of health and well-being in our country and beyond, as it relates to all. James's vision of what is possible has grown over the years to include a strong desire to understand the role of race, ethnicity, and other social forces in the lives of people of African descent, as well as people of other backgrounds throughout the diaspora. It is for these reasons, and many more, that there could be no more deserving person to be the first recipient of the University of Michigan's Distinguished Diversity Career Scholar Award. Please join me in welcoming to the stage our friend, Dr. James S. Jackson.
Well, if you don't sit down, I'm not going to be able to give this talk. My thanks for that introduction, but with that kind of introduction, good grief, there's no one's talk can live up to that, so I don't think there's any question about that. And mine won't either. And in fact, I've been totally thrown off my game today in terms of my talk by what I heard this morning. We've had an all-day symposium for those of you who just arrived, and it was an incredible demonstration of the breadth and depth of scholarship among African Americans, and particularly those who had been associated with the Program for Research on Black Americans. So I'm totally thrown off my game. I should be talking about something different. So we'll see how it goes anyway. My acknowledgement to President Schlissel and also to Provost Philbert, who are both here, and that's really wonderful. So this talk has given me an opportunity to reflect on an interesting career. So I would think about this talk as being a little different because it is in the Career Award, and so it's going to be a little different than my usual kind of scientific talks. My career spans over 5 decades as an undergraduate student at MSU. That was mentioned before, so I'm free now to say, yes, I went there. But one thing that no one has said yet today is that the reason why I went to MSU, and that's probably because you didn't know, because I was going to become the next great engineer. So my work, and I was accepted into electrical engineering in 1962 at Michigan State. So I was going to go and become an engineer. But what I found was that engineers were really boring. And I don't mean that personally for the engineers in the room, but it was in context. So engineering was really boring in the 1960s. There were things going on in 1962, the civil rights movements, other kinds of things, and that was much more exciting. So I survived about 2.5 years in that before kind of switching out and deciding to become a psychology major. I was a graduate student in physiological psychology at the University of Toledo, where I learned a lot about rats. That's what I did. I was a rat runner, and a fairly good one at that. And my master's thesis was on the effects of chlorpromazine on infant albino rats under different conditions of blah, 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 blah. It was really long. I got out of that because one day I put my hand into the thing to take the rat out to give them an injection because I was injecting them every day. So pull the rat out. I'd gotten pretty good about flipping it over, giving the subcutaneous injection and so on. But this time I'd gotten a rat who was on a deprivation schedule. That rat jumped on my finger. I started bleeding everywhere. I shook the rat off. I went to my advisor and said, look at what happened. I mean, the rat bit the hell out of me is what I essentially said to him. And he said to me, what happened to the rat? Well, I said, the hell with that. So I lickety-split, I decided I was going to go into social psychology. And I figured that there was no sophomore that I was trying to run an experiment that was going to be biting me on the finger. So that's how I got to Wayne State University and became a social psychologist and came to the University of Michigan where I expected to stay for 5 years. As most people coming here, this was the most outstanding social psychology program in the country. Lord knows I couldn't make it here and get tenure, but they did give me tenure and I never left. So I've been here the whole time. I'm honored by the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for this award, the National Center for Institutional Diversity, several wonderful colleagues, Cleopatra Caldwell, Robert Taylor, Woody Neighbors, that have worked to recommend me for this singular honor. Also my thanks to LSA, ISR, and all the other places that were named, including the offices of the Provost and the President. I should mention, very quickly to get this out of the way, you see me using a cane. So I have been ill. I have some health challenges. I'm feeling pretty good enough to give this talk at least today. Things are looking positive for me, so I do feel pretty good. So we'll see what happens. We'll keep an eye on it, but I'm the most thankful person in this room to be giving this talk today. All right. First of all, I would like to begin my talk by commenting on the value and the importance of higher education, and especially the potential contribution of a higher education system committed to the excellence of diversity. The American academic system has to change. It has to become a place that reflects the diversity of our society and the world, and in fact, celebrates and encourages the benefits to the intellectual and research infrastructure that diversity can bring. Today, we are a significant distance away from this ideal. There are many challenges to higher education. The United States has an enviable record in terms of providing opportunities for higher education in the world. And while many problems plague our K-12 educational system, especially those in America's inner cities, we have enjoyed since the turn of the last century the finest system of private and public higher education across the globe. We've been only second to Canada in the percentages of citizens over the age of 25 achieving post-secondary education. We are also a leader in the production of doctorates, and doctoral education has been nothing short of phenomenal. I'm hoping I can use this mouse to push things. Yeah, I can. That's really good. In fact, if we look at the first slide here, I just wanted to show very quickly that indeed we produce lots of doctorates. We even do about 3.4% increase, average growth over since 1958. It's incredible the number of things that we've been able to do here. Now, of course, in terms of underrepresented minorities, we've kind of fallen behind with regard to that participation, but that's one thing I really want to talk about. Clearly, the trends have not been equal in this country. Women, ethnic and racial minorities have not fared as well in post-secondary education, especially MA and doctoral education. Though the trends are upward, and today over 10% of all doctorates go to underrepresented minorities, about 6.1% black. While substantial progress has been made for women and minorities in obtaining bachelor's degree, master's levels, and doctoral degrees have lagged. So you can see in this next slide that over the period, 1976 through 2004, there is growth in terms of undergraduate enrollment. That is, we are making some progress in this particular movement. If we look at the change in black campus representation, you can see that we actually have made important strides over relatively long periods of time. In addition, if we looked at doctoral students, and again, while black doctoral enrollments actually are fairly flat and so on, that indeed we even produce large numbers of those as well. If we look at doctors awarded by race and ethnicity, again, it's fairly flat for blacks, but indeed, and the numbers are very similar. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Even with the contribution of similar dedicated black and other underrepresented institutions, it would certainly be much worse without their existence, especially in undergraduate education. Now, this slide just shows that the growth of the population projected out to 2050 is going to show tremendous growth in terms of underrepresented minority groups in terms of the population. We have to be concerned about that in terms of as we look at our institutions and who are we taking in to those institutions. So we know that 72.4% white increased 5.7% between 2000 and 2010, 12.6% black increased 12.3%, 4.8% Asian, 10.2% other multiple, 16.3% Hispanic or Latino. It's clear that the United States population is becoming an increasingly diverse place. On the other hand, and while we've seen large growth in terms of undergraduate students and others, we've seen the growth in the population distribution with undergraduate minorities. One of the amazing things of the last 50 years or so is the flatness of faculty representation, particularly among blacks. This slide shows you that it's about 3%. This is 2015. And that's about what it's been for the last 20 years, 20, 30, 40 years, in terms of what the representation looks like. If we look at the percentage of blacks in full-time faculty ranks at degree-granting institutions, you can see a slightly higher numbers in the lower ranks, lower numbers in the lower ranks. This includes both various different universities and colleges, historically black colleges and so on. If we took a look at only large white institutions and universities, that number comes in, like I said before, around somewhere between 3 and 4% of the faculty. So we've done a fairly good job over the years. It's waxed and waned. At the University of Michigan, we've gone since 1968. The percentage has been between 3.8 and 9.7%, peaking around some period of time in the Michigan mandate, and now somewhere around 4.5%, 4.3% in terms of black enrollment. I think indeed we can do better in that, and we certainly can do better in terms of faculty. There are a lot of challenges that face us in terms of higher education. There are political challenges in terms of cuts. We must more clearly delineate the important contributions of graduate education to scientific discoveries. We must deal with the important role that our future academicians, scientists, business, and artists play while in graduate school. We need greater international scope. Finally, though, I think one of the most important things is we must address problems of equity and inclusion by opening our doors even wider to individuals from groups who have not participated as fully as others. We have the room, and although less we would like to see, progress is indeed being made. One of the things that I think is important, even when African Americans have been able to secure faculty positions and so on, this is from the National Institutes of Health, you can see that African Americans are underrepresented in terms of the awards that are made within the NIH. This is something that's been very perplexing to people, although this is not the most interesting thing about this slide. What's the most interesting thing about this slide is the very low numbers of African American faculty who are actually participating within that particular research enterprise. But this is something that really has to be addressed. So I am concerned about these low numbers. I think we can do a lot better. I think there's a real reason as to why the faculty issue has been very difficult to crack. In some ways, the academia is the last bastion holding out in a way against the kind of diversity that we need. And it's something that we have to really deal with, and I'm going to talk about with the Program for Research on Black Americans. But one of the things that I think is important is that in giving a career award, that a personal narrative was an important aspect of this. I felt, I haven't talked about myself very personally over the years. Most people really don't know much about my background, about my history, because I just don't generally talk about that. I've never seen that as my role. I've seen my role as to project other people out, not so much with regard to projecting myself, and I have not done that. But let me talk a little bit about a personal narrative of me. This is my great-great-great-grandmother. That's me, right there, that little tyke over there. I was somewhere about 2.5. In fact, I kind of look like my grandchildren in a way. And this picture becomes important. I was born in 1944. I am 73. But I was born in 1944. This picture was taken somewhere around 1946, between 46 and 47. But that's not the most interesting thing. I wanted to situate this in the next picture. This picture is an interesting one. That is my mother on the left, right here. Oops. Well, how did that happen? All right, let's not move that. Huh. So this is my mother here. Again, this is around 1946. That is my grandmother. Some of the people in PRBA will remember her because she did a lot of the cooking for us when we had those parties and dinners at my house when I was a lot younger. This is her mother, my great-grandmother here, the one who was holding my hand before, and this is her mother. All right, this woman died in the early 1950s. She was 108 years old. And what's interesting about that is, of course, she was born a slave and was freed with emancipation at the end of the Civil War. So I showed this slide to make the point that at 73 years old, I indeed have either directly experienced de jure segregation and other forms of segregation in my own life, but through the history with regard to my family, we go back to slavery, actually, and interacted with people who had these particular kinds of experiences. So I say that point to let you know that these are not necessarily historical things that we talk about. These are part of what the lived experiences are. And that has an impact with regard to how we think about things. This is my grandfather, who is on the left. That's his wife, not my grandmother. Oops, you weren't supposed to see that one. And my uncle, and that's my mother, the same picture before, and my father. What's interesting about this picture is that my grandfather, who could pass for white, and did pass for white, had a unique way. They were all from South Carolina, and he and his wife would begin as black people in New York City on the train. At the Mason-Dixon line, they would become white and move into the white car. And then when they got to Ware Shoals, South Carolina, they would become black again because the people there knew that they were black. And he would do that all the time when he traveled. I mean, he didn't want to travel as Negro because that was really kind of problematic. But indeed, experiences with regard to the family. He talked about this when I was a young man before he passed away at about 86. And it was a very interesting idea about how to think about this. My father was a World War II veteran. In 1942, when he graduated from high school, he was offered a full scholarship in college, which is very unusual for Negroes in 1942. My mother, who became a registered nurse, also had a very interesting life. This slide is the only point to make about this slide is that I was young one time. That is my wife. She wasn't my wife at that particular point. But indeed, she was then. But we were both relatively young. So now I'm really kind of old. But this kind of reminds me that at one point in time that I was young. So I was born and raised in Inkster, Michigan. As I said before, born during World War II, and both lived then through de jure and de facto segregation. At age 73, as I said before, my lived experiences through my own direct contacts and those of my slave-born ancestors and her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren were all aligned. It's just not that long ago. 51 years ago, I was a graduating senior at Michigan State University. I was full of hope and confidence, and this is something that Belinda talked about before, because I was part of the young civil rights generation who had shared either directly or symbolically the March on Selma, the Mississippi Relief Fund, sit-ins, demonstrations, boycotts, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rap Brown, the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, the Black Panthers, and numerous other events that filled all of us in that era with hope that black dreams of true citizenship would be fulfilled. Because Robert L. Greene, one of MLK's lieutenants, one of his 6 lieutenants, was an advisor to my fraternity at Michigan State University, I was fortunate as a young man to meet an amazing array of people, of the giants of that era, including Malcolm X, Jimmy Hoffa. He was the most interesting person I met. Jesse Jackson, Dick Gregory, and indeed Martin Luther King, all people that I was able to talk to. My meeting with Martin Luther King was life transformative. And I really hadn't known how much until I was preparing for this talk. I wrote about this one time in Rackham back in the 70s or 80s about what that experience was by spending a whole day with him. But I really hadn't thought about one thing, and I'm going to hit on that particular issue as we go. Even in 1966, in response to my question to him, because I spent the whole day squiring him around, that was my job. I'd pick him up at the airport, spend all day with him. Hard work. And that was great. And he indicated concerns at that point about the fight for citizenship rights and what strategies might lead to full inclusion of the American Negro. That was a conversation that we had throughout the whole day. And as you know, it was a nonviolent approach that he was taking and how he saw this and what his belief was of how inclusion should indeed come about. But he had questions about it, and I had questions to him about it because I was probably more toward the Malcolm X, other kinds of visions in that particular period. People talked about some of our activist days, like taking over the American Psychological Association and other stuff. So I was pretty mouthy in those particular days. I have in earlier writings termed my generation of blacks the disappointment generation, because the hopes and aspirations, the confidence in the future of that era did not transform quickly into what were reasonable hopes of full citizenships. In many ways, I took away from my meeting with Reverend King a slightly different perspective on what needed to be done. It became clear to me as I began my career preparations that a strategy that directed attention to appeasing whites may not be the best approach with regard to what full incorporation might look like for blacks. And I will return to this particular theme a little later. There have been 4 periods of racial discrimination in the United States. Those periods include slavery, de jure and de facto segregation, and what I call status quo discrimination, which exists in the United States at this particular point in time. The government has participated in these. And while we may long for a universal system of human self-classification that permit maximal freedom of expression and so on, this is confounded by the fact that real discrimination and subjugation exists that ascribes different roles and opportunities to people who are phenotypically different, particularly those who are viewed as black. During the current period of what I call status quo subjugation, it is no longer in the interest of the government to be knowledgeable about the fortunes of those who may be classified as non-white. And thus we hear loud voices lamenting the ways in which racial classification is personally stifling, particularly the blacks, how this classification contributes to unfair advantages, especially by blacks, how this classification actually contributes to the problem of racial bias in the United States. What I call is the don't know, don't tell era. Into this era has come a shift away from affirmative action and a call for diversity. And what do we understand about that? Discussions of affirmative action programs are often framed in context of constitutionally fairness to whites, especially white men, or the damages done to protected groups and white women because of the stigma associated with being the beneficiaries of preferential treatment. If we look at the issue, and Terry Anderson did he's a historian from the Texas A&M University, and he wrote a book called The Strange Career of Affirmative Action. I would recommend this book to all to think about how affirmative action became appropriated by a very different set of perspectives than what it was when it was first developed. Starting in 1961, President John F. Kennedy used affirmative action for the first time in instructing federal contractors to take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are treated equitably. 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed into law. This was landmark legislation prohibiting employment discrimination by large employers whether or not they have government contracts or not. 1965, Lyndon B. Johnson issued Executive Order 11246, requiring all government contractors and subcontractors to take affirmative action to expand job opportunities for minorities. This was amended in 1967. But within 1 year, President Lyndon B. Johnson argued that fairness required more than a commitment to impartial treatment. In his famous 1965 commitment address at Howard University, he said, "You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of a race, and then say, you're free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. Thus, it is not enough just to open the gates of opportunity. All our citizens must have the ability to walk through those gates. We seek not just equality as a right and a theory, but equality as a fact and equality as a result." In 1970, Richard Nixon issued Order Number 4. Order Number 4 was revised to include women in 1971, and then President Nixon issued two more important executive orders, 11625 and a memorandum permissive goals and timetables in state and local governments. In 1973, we required all contractors to develop an acceptable affirmative action program, including an analysis of areas in which the contractor is deficient in the utilization. And they were instructed to take the term minority groups to refer to certain individuals. In 2006, though, Michigan voters adopted Proposal 2. It amends the Michigan Constitution to ban public institutions from discriminating against or giving preferential treatment to groups or individuals based on their race, gender, color, ethnicity, and national origin. And this proposition had a very chilling effect on the efforts that the University of Michigan had been making, indeed, to open up and to be a more inclusive place. But if affirmative action has been so successful historically, then why do we see the kinds of numbers and the statuses that exist for African Americans? I've always argued that particular point, that people have said affirmative action is not a good thing, it does all kinds of bad stuff, and so on. If anything, it probably hasn't done enough. In my estimation, much of the past and current debates on affirmative action actually missed the mark. While a great deal of attention focuses on the mechanics of affirmative action, or its unfairness to whites, or even its constitutionality, the real thrust and underlying rationale of affirmative action is in redressing current discriminatory practices in the United States. Programs of affirmative action is the cost that a purported free and open society has to pay when it tolerates individual and institutional forms of group-based discrimination in housing, schooling, job markets, criminal justice system, and health care against non-white racial and ethnic minorities and white women. Unfortunately, affirmative action has been perversely envisioned as a methodology for redressing the past wrongs of this society. The historical rationale for affirmative action, in order to make it more palatable, I think, was given as a need to overcome the legacies of a country that through its state-supported policies had left millions of people, especially blacks, unable to compete in the capitalist market system. The same argument was used for other groups, including white women, and inherent in this argument, though not clearly stated, was this tacit awareness that discriminatory effects were generational and long-term. And yet, there was the explicit proposition that the historical remnants of past discrimination could be overturned in one generation. And we know better than that as researchers. It's not possible. The understandable but misguided conceptualization of affirmative action programs is only addressing past wrongs. It's what drives the position of many, in some cases their opposition to any type of official record of racial and ethnic classification. Many conflate the problem with the remedy. They seem to act out of the belief that affirmative action is about past wrongs, committed by the society against blacks and other racial and ethnic groups. Because there is supposedly no longer any serious discrimination in this society, it's not clear that we should punish whites by permitting special favors in education and employment for blacks and others. And in fact, we don't even need any official statistics about racial classification because there is no racial discrimination which indeed occurs within the United States of America. Who truly believes that racial and gender discrimination is a thing of the past? Each and every day, government statistics about differentials in living arrangements, schooling opportunities, job-based discriminatory practices, glass ceilings, health, and mortality belie that serious discrimination has been eliminated. If one believes, however, in the face of dawning statistics, that there is no need for racially based data and affirmative action programs, one may also believe that it's the existence of these type of group-based programs themselves that create the problem. Whether it's the concern that affirmative action creates stigma for blacks and women, that affirmative action is unconstitutional, or that it's unfair indeed to whites in this society. Affirmative action is not the problem in the United States. The problem is what affirmative action attempts to address. If affirmative action is about past wrongs and race-based discrimination does not exist in the United States today, then the removal of racial and gender designations from official documents will have no effects upon the life chances of ethnic and racial minorities. If, on the other hand, affirmative action is a price that a democratic society has to pay in order to maintain a market-based economy and the related institutions that discriminate in multiple ways against certain ethnic and racial gender classes of people, then the effect of removing such information will be to solidify current differentials in social and economic opportunities, or even perhaps to turn back the clock on some of the meager progress that has been made over the last 50 years or so. Since the current discrimination-based treatment of peoples of color in this society is a product of hundreds of years of flavor and 19th and 20th century de jure and de facto segregation by state-supported systems, it's illogical to think that the elimination of affirmative action programs and the removal of race classifications would eliminate any of the problems related to large, broadly based differentials by race, ethnic, and sex statuses. If it did, I am sure that all of us in this room, regardless of race, creed, or gender, would support this position. But sadly, logic, history, and government statistics lead us to another inescapable conclusion. And it may be noted, as noted by Dr. Jamila Bowman Williams, and I'm going to call on her research quite a bit, and she is the granddaughter, of course, of the PRBA. Her father is Phil Bowman. He's somewhere grinning at it. We talked before. And she has written an absolute brilliant paper, I think, that's going to come out in the Law Review of the Washington University this year about the issue of affirmative action and diversity. And I draw on that in terms of thinking about it. I'm too fast on the trigger on this thing, so I can see. But what do we gain, I think, with an emphasis on diversity over a concern with the legal prescriptions that are embedded in civil rights legislation and commonly called affirmative action programs? Jamila says the following, that bias and discrimination continue to limit opportunities and outcomes for racial minorities in America. And this is the point that I was making. The diversity rationale, touting the broad benefits of inclusion, has become widely accepted in the United States. At the same time, many view a focus on anti-discrimination law and the threat of legal enforcement as outmoded and ineffective. Thus, corporate employers, courts, and universities talk less in terms of the mandates of law, such as the 1964 Civil Rights Act, or a legal case, and more in terms of a business case, where benefits of inclusion seem to accrue to everyone. It's easy to explain the appeal of the business case for diversity. It merges the goals of racial inclusion with business profitability and corporate interests. Anti-discrimination law, by contrast, is viewed as top-down and coercive. But there is one major problem. there's little to no evidence that the business case for diversity actually reduces bias and promotes racial inclusion. And this indeed is what her paper is all about, with some very interesting social psychological experiments, as well as an excellent review of these particular sets of issues. And this is in her 2017 paper that's going to come out soon. And in fact, in some ways, a diversity approach makes assumptions about motivation and intent. If only whites would understand the benefits of diversity, if we could only get this issue across to them, they would strongly endorse it. Why? Because we're making a strong business case. It really is good for everyone. Based upon my long ago discussion with Martin Luther King, I've always questioned this particular assumption. Do we have large numbers of well-meaning whites out there? If only we could explain to them the pain that's caused by the situation that exists in the United States, they indeed would then buy into a diversity, inclusive sort of notion. That is not to say that there are not large numbers of whites who do fit this description of being open to indeed change. But as we have sadly learned, particularly over the past year, there are many others who don't. The appeal of a diversity approach is obvious, but institutions are result-oriented. In my own approach to building a research institution that would address historic and current deficits in research and training related to Black Americans, the focus was on high-quality research and the mentoring of graduate students and junior faculty to be successful in the difficult world of the university. This was the challenge and the goal of PRBA. This was not to deny the importance of really speaking to whites about the importance of diversity and getting them to understand that. But I certainly didn't want to spend my time doing that. I thought the most important thing to do was to build a cadre of very well-trained African-American faculty who could go out and compete in the very competitive world of the university. As an aside, I was a pretty hard mentor. I'm sure a lot of the students, they laugh, but they know it's true. I was hard on them. I really was. In terms of what my expectation was. My expectation was very high for the students that I work with, both the postdocs, graduate students, junior faculty, because I knew they could do better. There's a story I like to tell. I don't know if I should tell it in this company, but I will anyway. I had a student one time I was giving her a particularly hard time about her thesis because I just didn't think it was written well enough, it didn't make the point well enough, and so on. So I knew, and she didn't know, that one of the things that used to happen in the 70s and 80s and 90s is that when people went on the job market, that those people at those institutions wanted to read the thesis of Black students particularly. They would want to get the thesis and they wanted to read it. So it had to be done very well. So she said to me that so-and-so, named not to be mentioned, said it was all right. And I said, no, it's not all right. It could be better. No, but so-and-so said it was just fine. And I said, have you ever thought that maybe I'm smarter than so-and-so? And of course, that had never crossed her mind. How could that cross her mind? Those are some of the things I think that we have to overcome. We have a long history in this country of building excellence from diversity of many types. There's no doubt about that. The nature of our immigrant society means that we have taken the best from the world's countries and along with native peoples, forge excellence in commerce, the arts, science, technology, and agriculture. Without the drive, energy, and desire of our ever-new immigrant populations, where would we be as a country? That sounds like it's going to get tested, by the way. Even slavery, a most shameful part of our past, had its roots in an attempt to import knowledge and experience in a wide variety of the skilled crafts and agricultural techniques. Slaves were not just brought here willy-nilly from Africa. They were even sought out for their particular skills. Think about the Mississippi Delta, rice production, other kinds of issues, and how people were selecting those individuals. So even at that particular point, the white slave owners understood that there were certain skills and abilities that these individuals had, even though later it was absolutely denied. Today, as a more mature country, we often appear afraid of change, of multiple ethnicities and races, of the cultural differences among the people who forged this society. For this reason, we need to look backwards and to build upon the lessons and wisdom of our diverse past. Now, this is not going to be easy. And I've argued at the beginning that higher education, especially public institutions, provide the advanced training opportunities for the majority of our particular citizens. But we have many challenges. If the undergraduate and graduate students are our highest priority, then the faculty is the key to all that we achieve. University faculty members stand as a fulcrum between the institutional past and the institutional future. Teacher, educator, role model, mentor. The women and men of our university faculty assume a weighty responsibility in being the creators of the repository of the cultural, scientific, technical, and artistic knowledge of the past and the innovators of the knowledge to come. The faculty has a collective responsibility, keeper and interpreter of knowledge, the engine for science innovation, the source of new aesthetics in the arts, culture, and the humanities, and foundation of future university leadership. We must at all costs nurture, protect, and maintain excellence in our faculty. And that excellence is dependent upon greater diversification in all demographic and social aspects of our broad society. And indeed, that's what we've been devoted to do in PRBA. You weren't supposed to see that either. So let me put that there. I want to talk about the PRBA in a way that was not discussed this morning. This morning was tremendously embarrassing to me because a lot of people talked about James, and that James's name was all over the place. And I know that's just not true. The quality of the people that I've had the opportunity, it's been my pleasure, and I've gained a great deal of working with a group of very, very smart and bright people. And as Bob Zients always told me, there's always somebody who's smarter than you. And many of these students have certainly been smarter than I am. And the ability to be able to work with them has been wonderful. But the PRBA, indeed, is probably one of the best examples of team science that we have. Team science has become all the rage today, particularly in the physical sciences, but also gaining more in the social and behavioral sciences as well. You know, where you have articles with 3,000 people's names on them or 300 names on them, team science is what it's about. PRBA was one of the earliest instantiations of what team science could possibly look like. So the experiences in my own training and professional career resulted in a long-term experiment within a largely white research university context in conducting team science on research on race and ethnicity. Team science or collaborative science in the social, biological, and physical sciences become the prevalent norm today. As noted earlier in the early 1970s, perhaps even truer today, there were no alternatives except to embark upon a team science approach to studying the social, psychological, and material dimensions of life for Black Americans. We didn't do this because of some conceptual reason that we invented. We didn't have any choice. You know, there were very few African-American faculty at that particular point. I was the first African-American faculty in the psychology department, hired in 1971. Ewart Thomas had been there as a part-time faculty member. And one other faculty member that I taught with. No, not Ed Epps, the other fellow who taught in community psychology. Huh? Yeah, right, Floyd Wiley. And he and I taught together for about 10 or 15 years on the base community psychology program. Perhaps we didn't have, like I said, didn't have any choice. The type of interdisciplinary perspectives required to study the complexity of life for discriminated against race or ethnic group in the United States demanded cooperation among individuals bridging the broad range of the social and behavioral sciences. Knowledge and research from economics, psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science, history, medicine, and public health were all needed to understand the circumstances and the lived experiences of African Americans in this particular country. You could not comprehend this particular group in an acceptable scientific way if you looked only through the lens of one particular discipline, and certainly not psychology. Our modest goal was to highlight the nature and meaning of these lived experiences by what we call giving voice to Black Americans. We did not know then that 30 years later, team science would be all the rage. And in fact, I recently finished a stint on the National Academy of Science Committee on team science, and in fact wrote 2 of the chapters myself on what team science looks like in a much more general way. This has become the wave of what the future looks like. Now, psychology, now I'm going to rag on psychology for a minute here, if you don't mind. I see the chair is there, so I'm speaking to her now. Was not the most hospitable place for large-scale team science projects, and especially those focused on race and ethnicity in 1971. Trust me, I'm not going to show you any data on that, but indeed it was true. On the other hand, the Institute for Social Research, which was founded about 70 years ago, based upon multidisciplinary collaborative team science principles. Thus, ISR became a more viable and welcoming home for this research project than the Department of Psychology at that particular time. The challenges posed in terms of students, faculty, institutional, disciplinary, external funding sponsors, and so on at ISR indeed were kind of consistent and open to this particular approach. The PRBA has become a very successful endeavor over this time. Things have changed in a way, but the larger academic community, however, remains largely a white, ethnocentric environment. Now, I feel fortunate that I've been able to do so many interesting scientific and educational projects. However, one always laments for what one could have done, absent structural and individual barriers to success. And in many ways, this is the conundrum faced by most Black academics, whether 5 decades ago or today. In environments fraught with institutional barriers, how does a Black individual academic attain a firm grasp on his or her strengths, liabilities, and contributions? One is always faced with the attributional ambiguity of what are personal failings or limitations and what are actual environmental impediments to success. And I knew when we started mentoring and so on within PRBA that to adequately prepare these individuals as they went out to these far-flung universities and so on, that they would have to be able to address, to deal with these particular issues in order to be as successful. Thank God most of them have been able to do that and have had the will and the ability to be able to do that. As early on in my career, I want to note that I had cause to participate in many activities with the fledgling Association of Black Psychologists, with the Black Student Psychological Association. I became national president of both those organizations. Out of these roles and the work of pioneers like Reginald Jones and Robert Williams grew a perspective on what constituted Black psychology. And it was important to be able to develop research strategies which proceed from real life needs, the development of collaborative relationships with Black communities, and the development of new research competencies. We will be able to put those same principles into the development of the PRBA. So what occurred at the University of Michigan? A number of historically important events, like note, an active Black Student Psychological Association, state associations of Black psychologists, and most importantly, a critical mass of bright, energetic Black graduate students and a receptive environment at the Institute for Social Research, largely contributed to by the unwavering intellectual and material assistance of Patricia and Gerald Gurin. In fact, when I came here, they put me in charge of a project. I talked to Pat about this the other night, so I think I can say this again. They had a project that was ongoing with lots of the black graduate students that had been admitted. And these black graduate students had gone crazy in the sense that indeed they were trying to do things outside of the context of what indeed you could do. Not you, Woody, and other people. You were all kind of sick. I'm talking about the people who were there then. And through conversation, I became the study director for this, and then I was faced with the deal of dealing with these particular students. But the good thing that came out of our arguments and discussions and me telling them, no, you cannot do that. No, you can't take over the president's house. That's not the thing to do, although they did it anyway. And no, you can't take over this project from Patricia and Gerald Guerin. It's their project, and therefore they should be setting the limits and so on. Out of those conversations, many of them late at night, many of them over drinks and whatever the case may be, we were able to forge ideas about what a research program should look like going forward. This wasn't just from the fertile mind of James Jackson, but it actually came out of the interaction with these particular students, and indeed we were able to develop, based upon that, the ideas about the PRBA. So we were concerned with regard to the continuing inequality that's linked to race and ethnicity. We knew that in order to be able to address that, there were some things that we had to do in order to be able to address that. And at the basis of the initial development of the PRBA, there were several major assumptions. One, that there's been a long history of poorly conceptualized, poorly conducted, and poorly interpreted research on blacks. That was a problem then, and sometimes it gets to be a problem now. Two, much of what is unique to black Americans has been subjugated to deficit and culture of poverty theorizing. Three, the lack of black empirically trained social scientists has contributed to the first two problems. That these are the three problems that indeed the PRBA tried to do that. Unfortunately, while the PRBA has contributed to progress in all of these areas, the field still lags behind. The most recent of the PRBA national studies, and let me just focus on that, the National Survey of American Life was designed to be a 2-decade follow-up to the National Survey of Black Americans that was done in 1979-80. Field work ended sometime in 2002. And there were several aspects of that study that were important that I'd like to note. First, the survey included a large nationally representative sample of African Americans and national samples of the Afro-Caribbean populations under the recognition that the black population in the United States was becoming much more diverse. And at least those two studies had to be included, those two groups. If we were doing this study today, and somebody would give me the $44 million that would be required to replicate the National Survey of American Life, no one has, I'm doing this because I think this is being webcast. And if George Soros is out there and he wants to give me $44 million, I will take it and we will do a new National Survey of American Life. And what would be different is that we would include the African immigrant population into that study. We would have a larger Caribbean population to study, and much more diverse within the Caribbean population. Somebody asked you that question before, in order to be able to address that. We indeed used lots of multiple theoretically driven measures of SES in terms of this study. Was important. We employed the successful novel geographical screening procedures that we developed in NSBA. Somebody mentioned that today for you that weren't there. One was called WASP, the Wide Area Screening Procedure, which came to me in a dream. It's very expensive to scientifically find blacks, particularly those who live in areas of low concentration of blacks or high concentration of whites. But if you're going to represent the population, you have to represent those individuals. And what's wrong with most national studies that don't take heed of this is that they wind up with unacceptable sampling error because they're sampling the same people over and over again. And you get huge differences between blacks and whites, not because those differences really exist, because you sampled the populations in different kinds of ways. That had to be overcome. We also had to overcome the fact that African Americans are clustered. We had to get a procedure that would allow us to do and to overcome that clustering, which we were able to do. The study also addressed the heterogeneity of experiences across ethnic groups within the black population. And this heterogeneity was very important. We not only assessed the presence of physical health and mental disorders, but we also looked at levels of impairment. We also selected from segments selected in proportion to the African American and Afro-Caribbean population, making this the first sample of people of different race and ethnic groups. One of the other things that we've done within the NSAL, and Tom Levice, who actually pioneered in writing about this particular issue, the NSAL, which is just based on the distribution of the black and Caribbean populations, actually samples whites who live in various areas of black concentration. No one has actually worked very much with this particular fact, but we have whites who live in areas of high black density, and we have whites who live in areas of very low black density. The issue would be, and based upon Tom's work, we would imagine that those whites would look very different from each other in terms of their health, their mental health, and other kinds of outcomes. But that was done on purpose. The final thing I want to comment on, and I will do this very quickly. We could not do the high quality research without really addressing the issue of training and mentoring. At the point we were doing this study, there was me and Jerry, and a whole bunch of graduate students who were struggling with regard to their courses and to other things that they needed to do. We were able to add two very significant people to that, and I want to mention three very significant people, actually. Belinda Tucker, who talked this morning, Phil Bowman, who didn't talk, but perhaps should have, and Shirley Hackett. And I can tell you right now, we never would have been able to deliver this particular study without the input of these three young professionals. And then added to that were graduate students that we had asked to step up into these very important professional roles, like Woody Neighbors, Robert Taylor, Linda Chatters, and other people that helped design sections of the questionnaire, pretest, and other kinds of things. We couldn't have done it without them. That's why it was indeed about team science. This was not a top-down effort. But the fact is that it was very important in terms of mentoring. Since the beginning of the program, over 250 graduate students, 150 postdoctoral scholars, and numerous undergraduate students have participated in PRBA research projects. Many of the postdoctoral scholars and graduate students trained in this program now form the core of the primary research team. Others have assumed positions in industry, research, and academic institutions throughout the country. One highlight has been the summer training program in which we bring scholars in. And the fact is that we have indeed, I think, been successful. This is the oldest currently operating social science research team devoted to the collection, analysis, and interpretation of data based upon national and national probability samples. In addition to the substantive contribution of the studies, we have had to develop novel and unique survey sampling and questionnaire methods. These studies have attracted and focused the attention of the entire social science community on what we're doing. Over the last nearly 50 years, I have worked with a broad array of colleagues, graduate students, and other undergraduate students in giving voice to Black Americans. I want to make the final point here. Change is coming. It may not be as rapid or broad as many of us would like, but the efforts of so many over the last 50 years to provide opportunities and support for the growing numbers of underrepresented students and faculty in graduate education is a fact. And I'm happy that we've been able to contribute whatever small amount that we've been able to do. Now is not the time to celebrate, however. Now is the time to redouble our efforts to increase opportunities, equity, and inclusion in the academy. There are many routes to success in our country, but one of the most true and tried is through the accumulation of higher education. Our vision must be an inclusive one, embracing the diversity in our society that have joined so many volunteer and non-volunteer citizens over its history into a broad mosaic of colors, genders, cultures, and values. An overarching value for all of us must be in the continuing education and training of future generations. This is the fundamental engine of change and progress, and the vehicle by which our children secure a brighter future. There are a number of things that are wrong with American higher education today, and I've mentioned a few of them during the course of my talk, but there's an awful lot of it that is right. We, as responsible stewards of this and similar institutions, should attempt to steer the right course, a course that may lead us back to our roots and propel us into a new century, fully prepared to work with countless thousands of the new generations of graduate students. We'll all have to contribute to the renewal, the reinvention, if you will, of American higher education. It has done a lot, and it can do so much more, and with your help, it will. Thank you. I'll stand. I'll answer a few questions too. She asked me to stand here for some reason. I don't know. I'll stand here. I do what I'm told.
Really? Yeah. To cap off this really wonderful day, I invite Provost Martin Philbert to the podium to present the University of Michigan's Distinguished Diversity Scholar Career Award.
I'd like to invite President Mark Schlissel and Vice Provost and Chief Diversity Officer Robert Sellers to join us at the podium.
Should I move?
Yeah.
All these,
There's
all
gonna
these important people I know.
There'll be a photo op, so
okay.
you should be center stage, perhaps.
Okay.
James, it is a true honor to present you with this plaque, recognizing you as the first recipient of the Distinguished Diversity Career Scholar Award. Your research has for 4 decades been path-breaking and has shaped the research agenda for social science in the United States. You are an exemplar of the University of Michigan's commitment to creating, communicating, preserving, and applying knowledge, and to educating students who challenge the present and enrich the future. We and the generation to come are forever indebted to you. Just one moment more. It is with great pleasure that I am announcing this evening that the award presented to James today will be known going forward as the James S. Jackson Distinguished Career Award for Diversity Scholarship. We're so pleased to recognize your long-lasting contributions in this way, and you may now be seated. Thank you.
All right. Let's now be seated. I'm through. Thank you.
This concludes today's program. Thank you all for joining us today. We know that there are many of you who are here today who would like to share good wishes and reflections for James. You probably catch him for a few questions after this. But we also have a memory book in the back on your way out of the auditorium that we invite you to sign and jot down good wishes and memories for you to sign on the way out. With that, I thank you and wish you a great evening.